Grain markets tumbled on Monday and Tuesday before resurfacing Wednesday. On Thursday morning, we talked with Frayne Olson about wheat production here and abroad, the balance between corn and wheat for feed use, and what signs to look for that may signal grain markets are headed downward.
Well, that's always the big challenge. Everybody wants to know when the peak of the market is in because that's when they'd like to sell everything, but predicting that is almost impossible. There is one guideline that I try and use, though, as I've talked to farmers, to get a reference point. Right now, because we are in such a weather market and everybody's dominated by trying to forecast what their yield expectations are going to be and therefore what prices have to be to ration use, the rule of thumb that I'm using is as long as the reports coming out of yield forecasts, yield predictions continue to drop, commodity prices will stay strong and move upward. But about that time when it looks like the yield forecasts are starting to flatten out or stabilize a bit, my suggestion, my bias is that will be when prices will probably peak out.
And it seems like we're still on the downward end of that.
Yep, and what happens is the futures market tends to get a little ahead of the cash market, in particular in these kinds of conditions. And so the pendulum tends to swing a little bit too high on the upward side before retracing a bit.
Let's move into the wheat market, and specifically let's go to North Dakota where harvest is underway. And what are you seeing there for yields?
Yeah, we're just getting started in spring wheat harvest. The early reports we're getting out of the farming community right now is that yields are pretty good. Everybody's been a bit surprised and pleased. At least the early fields were. Quality has been very good. Test weights and proteins have been good. I suspect, though, as we start moving into the later phases of harvest, we might see some yield drag going on because we did have some hot and dry weather appear at a kind of a critical stage for some of the later crop. But right now, everybody's pretty pleased with the wheat harvest and hoping that that continues.
Miles better than last year, at least?
Yeah, much better than last year. The wheat crop got in a lot earlier this year from a planting date standpoint, and planting progress is very quick. We had enough soil reserves, soil moisture reserves, that the wheat crop made it without too much stress.
Let's take a look to the North, Frayne, and internationally in Canada. How strong do you think that crop will be?
Well, the reports coming out of Canada are very similar to North Dakota. They got in the fields a little bit later than we did because they had a little wetter conditions, but they've actually had a very good growing season as well. So the current expectations are that the Canadian wheat crop is also going to be very good yields as well as pretty good quality at this point. In fact, I hate to say this, but there are a few parts in Canada that are complaining because it's getting a little bit too wet.
How dare you, Frayne. Let's move to the Black Sea region. Is there going to be enough competition there that exports are going to be tight?
That is one of the things that the wheat market is looking at very closely right now. As we've, up until this point, the wheat market has really been a follower to corn and soybeans, again, because of the competition going on in the feed market. But the other underlying issue is what's happening in the Black Sea region. Again, Black Sea region has both winter wheat and spring wheat growing regions. The winter wheat region has had some problems earlier on. The spring wheat region right now is in that flowering reproductive stage, and that core region is also getting very hot and dry at this point. So there are a few rumors that are starting to appear that the Black Sea region, in particular Russia, may put another export ban on. Right now, my view is that might be a little bit premature, but again, if the conditions merit it, that may be something that we look at. And that's really important, to be very honest, for the winter wheat crop. Winter wheat marketings, especially in the southern plains, that Black Sea region competes with some of our major market outlets in the international stage.
You mentioned wheat for feed use. Let's talk about that more, because if corn keeps continuing to go up or to rise, how much of a substitution could we see there, maybe internationally more so than domestically?
Yes, correct. One of the things in the U.S., we always look at corn as our primary feed, and we don't always think about wheat as a feed substitute. There are a few livestock producers that will do that, but it's really a minority. But if you shift to the international stage, feed wheat is actually a very common source, an alternative to corn internationally. And so one of the things is, as the yield expectations keep dropping in the States and we start looking at how do we ration demand, the export market is one of those that we pay attention to. And as corn prices come up, all of a sudden internationally, feed wheat becomes a very viable alternative. And internationally, that's not an uncommon thing to do. So obviously, if we can get some more feed usage in the international markets, that opens the door for additional export pace from the wheat sector here in the U.S.